Let's pray. Open our ears, Lord, to hear your word, to know your voice. Speak to our hearts and strengthen our wills, that we may serve you today, now and always. Amen. Yes, moving from being a servant to being a friend is a big call. And of course, in the final verses of the gospel reading that Glenn has just brought us, we hear about, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. Much of my working life has been spent as an employee, working for others. An employee normally has a set regime of duties, if you like, a set of known conditions, a set of lines of accountability, listed sometimes limited responsibilities and maybe even limited expectations sometimes, and at times to be an employee and leave someone else with the worry of how it all works out can be comforting. It can become quite comfortable even. But when we're in charge, or when we're in partnership with others, and by partnership I'm not just talking about work, but talking about a partnership with a spouse, a colleague, even a friend, it's a different thing altogether. The way we communicate will be different. The levels of responsibility, the routines or the lack thereof, and your status, though all these things change. Sometimes being in partnership or being in charge can be an onerous and can even be a scary thing. Let's think about that shift that we hear in the gospel reading and in 1 John as well, through the lens of friendship and servanthood. Many biblical historians, theologians, and even philologists. Anyone know what a philologist is? Sorry? Yeah? A philatelist. A philologist, right, okay. It's a person who studies language, okay? Studies language or the patterns of our literacy. But many of those historians and philologists and theologians believe that the author of 1 John and John's Gospel are one in the same. The first letter of John is written about the same time as the Gospel according to John. And both of these were written to the early Gentile Christians. And it was written, both of them really in some ways, well, particularly 1 John, was written to counter this movement that was happening in the late first century, a thing called Docetism. And one of the chief tenets of Docetism was that these people who were still trying to work out what Christianity was like believed that Jesus was indeed not human, that he was always God, and therefore he did not suffer upon the cross, and he did not have the full gamut of human emotions and experiences that we counter. So John is writing to say, no, I know this is what Jesus was like. Jesus was a God, Jesus was a man, and Jesus suffered and had joy as well as grief. John is at pains to say that Jesus, like us, was made of blood and water, that we hear in verse 6. And conversely too, and this is the interesting part, and this is again another part I love, that we too, as humans, contain the divine spark of Jesus. In verse 1, it says, everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. Is born of God. Friendship, a very humanly thing that we know of. And love intermingles in these readings with the God paradigm. Friendship and love. The passage in John's Gospel has much to say about love and friendship in the forms of a new relationship, a new status, new responsibilities that have arrived for all through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. What I want to do is just dwell for a few minutes on three key words. Love, servanthood, and friendship. Firstly, the word love. There are many Greek words for love. We have the one word, but there are many Greek words. And there's at least 4 of those derivations, if you like, or words for love that are used in the scriptures. We have eros, which is erotic, bodily love. We have a thing called storge, which is natural love. And we have phileo love, which is a brotherly or companionship or companionable love. Love for each other. Now, they're all Greek words for love, but John, in these passages, doesn't use any of those words for love. He uses a 4th one. He uses the word agape. Agape, which is a higher love. It's a love that is selfless. It's a love that's entirely focused upon the other person or the community away from themselves. Selfless and sacrificing love. And John uses derivations of this agape word 9 times in the gospel passage. And he combines this word, or at least aligns it, with the word friendship as well. Friendship. Something that denotes an equality of relationship, a partnership, or a linking together with and for the other. But what John does also in this passage is that he delineates or juxtaposes, if you like, servanthood from friendship. The Greek word again for servant, which he uses twice, is the word doulos. And doulos literally means slave. We understand perhaps a servant to be slightly different, but the word is really slave. And this had a particular meaning in the 1st century for those Jews that were incorporated into the Roman Empire. You see, slaves in the 1st century were considered property, and they were considered the property of the empire. And as such, they could be disposed of or as sought fit by their owners within the empire. And these were usually people from conquered nations, those born into the low status of slavery in 2nd generation families, if you like. And slaves and their families usually remained as slaves until their earthly death. However, as people like John would have known, slaves, even in the 1st century in the Roman Empire, could gain their freedom or granted their freedom, and even be given the full rights of a citizen of Rome, if their owner or the state willed it to be so. So you didn't have to be that slave. You could There was a mechanism available. And it's interesting, doing a little bit of research during the course of the week, we know of many of the emperors and their status, but there was one called Publius Helvius Pertinax. Say that after me 5 times. And he indeed was the son of a freed slave, to become the emperor, yet the son of a freed slave. Think about that in the Christian journey too. So he became the emperor in 193 AD. God too wills us to have the full rights of being a citizen in God's kingdom, and to be in friendship and to be in fellowship with the Master. Moving from being in a restricted relationship of a slave to a master to being in full relationship as a friend to the master can actually be a bit scary. Because as we've said at the very beginning, our responsibilities are grown and our level of accountability is also deepened, and our level of trust in the other is also enhanced. It's also scary because knowing God's business, as verse 15 of the Gospel reading says, means following God's ways. Not some, but all. Following God's ways. And you might look at 1 John 5 verse 3 and John 15 verse 10 for those words. That is, friendship where we have been chosen by God must be one where we do as God commands. Verse 14. And being a friend of God requires of us to bear fruit. Verse 16. We hear Jesus' words about that, meaning that we too lay down our lives as Jesus did for others, agape style, for friends and for enemies alike. We think of others more highly than we think of ourselves. We give freely. We share freely. We live generously. We love selflessly. We share our faith abundantly. And we speak to our Creator friend often. But remember this, if it seems like a burden, we're all still on trainer wheels. Being a friend of God's is a process, a lifelong process, a process with its ups and downs. When the downs come, when we for the umpteenth time fall flat on our face, let's not give up, but instead give in. Not give up, give in. Give in to a friend who's in the business of agape love. And focus your eyes upon the one who will pick you up and who will dust you off, and whisper these words from 1 John 5:4 again in your ear. Everyone born of God overcomes the world. May God bless you all with this understanding.